Recording in progress.
Unit 4.4.1, the social construction of childhood. How important is this particular topic? Now, when we talk about childhood, we have had questions on childhood. I mean, if we talk about the paper structure that we had pre-2021, right? 2021 से पहले जो आपके पास पेपर स्ट्रक्चर था या पहले जो आपके पास पास पेपर्स थे उनको अगर आप खोल के देखते हैं तो you've had a lot of questions on childhood. However, recently अगर हम उठा के देखते हैं तो the amount of questions that you've had on childhood, I wouldn't say they're a lot, but then they're at the same time they aren't any less either. ठीक है? This particular topic, childhood, we used to teach this separately. I mean, this used to be taught separately because it was considered to be this important. Now, when we talk about the social construction of childhood, before we proceed, like I made every one of you read through this particular content that you see on the screen right now. This is a summary from the book Themes and Perspectives that was written by Haralambous and Holborn. अच्छा जो आप लोगों के पास purple book है जिसे हम follow कर रहे हैं, that has been written by Haralambous and Holborn too. But ये जो आपके पास for now what you see on the screen, this is from another book. It's a very thick book. आसान ज़बान में fat book, ठीक है? And this is amazing, right? It's very detailed. So this is a summary from the topic childhood as a social construct. You might as well, while going through the video, you might as well want to give this a read once again. So I'll just show you this entire content. And for the ones who are sitting in front of me, you have all read through this, right? You've all read through this. So here you go. So moving on to the second page here. Taking it ahead. Whenever you're going through this video, I'd want everyone to give this a read, right? Give this entire thing a read so that your understanding gets better on this. So yeah, getting started with this topic, the social construction of childhood, unit 4.4.1. Now, what do we mean when we use the term social construction of childhood? हम बात कर रहे हैं यहाँ पे about social construction of childhood. I'd want everyone to have the notebooks in front of them and to be making notes. Don't sit idle, make notes, right? Keep yourself active, stay charged. The social construction of childhood. अब इसका मतलब क्या है जब हम बात करते हैं social construction of childhood की? जब हम social construction of childhood की बात करते हैं तो the notion, the idea over here is the misconception. I'd like to use the word misconception over here. The misconception that people carry about childhood being a distinctive, the misconception that people carry about childhood being or childhood experiences being natural, उस childhood experience being natural or being universal को ये idea social construction का negate कर रहा है, ठीक है? Social construction of childhood versus the universality of childhood, or you may also refer to it as childhood being natural. तो जब हम बात करते हैं about childhood not being natural, when we're talking about childhood not being natural, the idea over here is that the experiences that individuals have, that experiences that children have today are different. I mean, agar aap compare karte ho between the experiences that a child from a Western society has, from a child from, let's just say, our part of the world, you'd see that they have different experiences. Likewise, if you talk about the experience of children based on their gender, they have different experiences. उसी तरीके से अगर आप बात करते हो about the experiences on the basis of the social class they belong to, उसी तरीके से if you're talking about the experiences individuals have on the basis of the ethnic origins they come from. तो childhood एक social construct है और एक natural phenomenon नहीं है, ठीक है? Childhood एक social construct है और एक natural phenomenon नहीं है. This is, I mean, ऐसा माना जाता है by many sociologists, ठीक है? The common sense tends to assume that childhood is merely a development or a biological stage. तो layman observation की बात करते हैं, जब या हम common sensual assumptions की बात करते हैं, तो typically childhood को एक biological stage consider किया जा रहा होता है, where before you getting through your way to adulthood. However, sociologists, they differ. I mean, they negate this idea. According to sociologists, the experience of childhood appear to vary between different societies and different historical periods. Clear here? Society to society, agar aap cross cultural comparison karte hain, to you'd figure out that the experiences of childhood, they differ from society to society. One. Number two, agar aap historically अगर आप अलग अलग eras को compare करते हैं भाईजान, childhood the way you see it today in this 21st century, compared to the childhood that we had, I mean that I had back in the 20th century, compared to the childhood people experienced in the 19th century, the 18th century, you'd come across a lot of variations, right? To put this in a simple manner for you to be able to relate to this well, I'm sure you'd agree that the childhood you as teenagers today have, adults, your adults or almost adults, right? The childhood experiences that you had, if you compare those childhood experiences with children in your family, younger children in your family, they're having today, they're different. Had childhood been natural, every child in every part of the world would have had the same experiences. They would have all had the same childhood experiences, but this does not really happen. Clear here? So sociologists, more or less, they all agree to the idea. They unanimously agree that childhood is not a natural phenomenon. There's a lot more than it being a natural phenomenon, and it would be better to refer to or to consider childhood as a social construct. Are we clear there? Taking it ahead, they have therefore come to the conclusion that childhood is a social construction, something that is created by the society. What does this word social construction mean? Social construction, my dear, is something that has been created by the society. And of course, if we're talking about something that has been created by the society, our society ने इसको एक particular तरीके से shape किया है, there's a possibility कल society इसे किसी और तरीके से shape करे, परसों उसे किसी और तरीके से shape करे. Clear? So this entire nature of childhood, it wouldn't be wrong agar hum ise kehte hain that this is pretty dynamic and this is not static. It is not static, it is rather dynamic, right? Taking it ahead, something created by society rather than simply a natural stage of physical and mental development. Sociologists argue that what people mean by childhood and the position that children occupy in society is not fixed. Like I said, it is not static. It keeps on changing with time across societies. It keeps on changing with time across societies, but differs between individuals based on the time, the place, the culture, the situation, so on and so forth. Your religion, your custom, your traditions, your region, so on and so forth. Clear here? Now, taking this ahead, before we proceed, I'd like to give you guys all, I'd like to give you all a quick little idea about what we intend on doing today. This is the topic that we have in front of us, the social construction of childhood. This is broadly divided into four main headings. Number one, my dear, we talk about childhood in pre-industrial societies. Industrialization se pehle. Industrialization se pehle childhood kaisa hota tha. Number two, we talk about childhood or how childhood was like during the industrialization period, right? पहले हम प्री इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन पीरियड के अंदर चाइल्डहुड को डिस्कस करेंगे, फिर हम इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन होने के बाद चाइल्डहुड एक्सपीरियंसेस कैसे थे उसको डिस्कस करेंगे, followed by a child centered the society or a child centered family, that is the 20th century. उसके बाद eventually we talk about children and the state. तो broadly हम लोग childhood as a social construct को चार main categories के अंदर इस topic को चार main headings से divide कर रहे हैं, and this is how we would be discussing this. Are we all good? Right? Now, when we talk about this idea of childhood being a social construct, this idea of childhood being a social construct, my dear, was put forward by Philip Aries. This idea was put forward by Philip Aries in 1962. Have a closer look at the screen. This idea was put forward by Philip Aries in 1962. If we talk about childhood being a social construct, according to this historian Philip Aries, now let me walk you through this. According to this historian Philip Aries, जब हम बात करते हैं about childhood, in 1962 he wrote a book. The name of his book was Centuries of Childhood. Philip Aries wrote a book. The name of his book was Centuries of Childhood. And according to Philip Aries, this entire idea, this entire notion of childhood is a recent invention. Let me re-say that. According to Philip Aries, this entire idea of childhood is a recent invention. आम जबान में फिलिप एरीज कहता है कि जनाब जिस चीज को आज आप चाइल्डहुड कह रहे हो, ये चीज एक recent invention है. Or in other words, there was no such thing as childhood till a couple of centuries back. Now, what Aries did was, Philip Aries was a historian. What he did was he analyzed some paintings. Right, he analyzed some paintings, historian था, और उन paintings को analyze करके Philip Aries इस conclusion पे पहुंचा कि childhood एक recent invention है. Childhood as we see it today, let me clarify, childhood as we see it today is a recent invention, right? According to Philip Perry, there was a time when children were treated like mini adults, miniature adults, little miniature, little adults, right? There was a time, according to Aries, when children were considered to be mini adults. They used to be involved into activities adults were involved in. They used to dress like adults, right? As soon as a child was considered to be physically independent around the age of 7 years, a child was no more seen as a child the way we see it today. A child was involved into activities that adults are involved in. The child was expected to work like adults do. Of course, it had to do with your physical capacity, right? कुछ बच्चे होते हैं बचपन से ही मतलब माशाल्लाह से डंगर डंगर टाइप के बच्चे होते हैं. या हम आहिस्ता आहिस्ता कहते हैं आहिस्ता आहिस्ता कहते हैं, ठीक है. मैं हिस्ट्री को उठाते हुए तो फिलिप पेरिस का पहले अकाउंट बता रहा हूँ, बाद में मैं बताता हूँ जो आप कह रहे हो, ठीक है. तो चिल्ड्रन वो इन्वॉल्व इनटू एक्टिविटीज दैट अडल्ट्स आर यूजुअली एक्सपेक्टेड टू बी इन्वॉल्वड in. They were involved into hard work, heavy work, violent activities, and even sexual activities. Like I said, they used to dress like adults. Things that are assumed or things that are seen as being inappropriate for children today, पहले there was a time जब ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं था. According to Aries, it was after the 15th century when this entire notion of childhood being a distinctively different phase of an individual's life started developing. Philip Aries claim करता है 15th century के बाद it was considered, it was seen and seen by religious scholars. According to Aries, religious scholars came up with this idea, this notion that childhood is a distinctively different phase of an individual's life, and children should be considered as blank slates. Children should be considered innocent. Children should be treated like blank slates that need to be taught, that need to be brought up in a manner that they know about right and wrong. बच्चों की morality develop करो. An innocent phase of an individual's life, a phase where they're away from, or where they should be kept away from, the harsh realities of the world. नहीं, religious Aries historian था, ठीक है. Aries historical analysis मतलब he had data more, like I said, उसके पास typically जो data यूज उसने किया था वो पेंटिंग्स थी, ठीक है. तो टाइम एनालाइज टाइमलाइन बनाते हुए एरीज कह रहा है कि भाईजान देखो ऐसी कोई चीज तो वे यू सी चाइल्डहुड टुडे ऐसा पहले कुछ था ही नहीं, राइट. ये बैठ के एनालाइज कर रहे हैं 1962 में. स्क्रीन के राइट टॉप पे देखें, यू सी द बुक सेंचुरीज ऑफ चाइल्डहुड. एरीज बैठ के एनालाइज कर रहा है और एनालाइज करके वो ये कंक्लूड कर रहा है that there was no such thing as childhood. Are we good? Are we all good? Does anyone have any question? No? Okay. Now, we are discussing this under the heading of the social construction of childhood. When we talk about the social construction of childhood, if you have a look at the niche wala part of the screen, you'd see Aries argues that childhood as a distinctive phase is a social development is a consequence of modern societies. Aries suggests that changing beliefs in childhood developed as childhood became defined as a phase of uncorrected innocence, to be nurtured and encouraged. Children were not to be seen as little adults, but as beings who need the protection of adults. Do we all understand this? इसने इन्वेंट नहीं किया था. ये कह रहा है जो जिस तरीके से चाइल्डहुड को आप आज देखते हो, ठीक है, चाइल्डहुड इस तरह की कोई चीज पहले थी ही नहीं. आप इंडिविजुअल्स को मिनी अडल्ट्स की तरह ट्रीट कर रहे होते थे, कपड़े वही पहनते थे, उसी तरीके से they used to get involved, they used to be involved into activities that adults were involved in. अच्छा, we studying sociology, right? अब एरीज ऐसा नहीं कि उसने बोल दिया तो पत्थर पे लकीर हो गई. He has faced a lot of criticism too. But the notion of childhood being something that's a recent invention is again totally negating the idea of childhood being a natural phenomenon. Are we clear there? Taking it ahead. Now, the social historian Philip Aries suggested that what children experience today as childhood is a recent invention, right? Focus on this line. What children experience today is a recent invention or a social construction, right? As John Clark in 2009 notes, this view holds that sometime between 1600 and the 20th century, the idea, see, sometime between the 1600s and the 20th century. Clear here? That is, ठीक है? Ab 20th century, the idea of childhood was invented, and we now think of as childhood would not have made sense to our ancestors. I think this makes a lot of sense, right? The amount of laws that have been passed to protect childhood, the amount of protection children receive today, right? The amount of access children have to technology. जो आप पीछे पढ़ रहे थे ना नील पोस्टमैन, ये रहा, मैं आपको दिखा देता हूँ, ये रहा नील पोस्टमैन, this part majorly, ठीक है, this person postman. Clear? Exactly, yeah. Again, like I was trying to explain this wonderful gentleman over here, what you're talking about is today. We'll get there, but I'm trying to follow a particular timeline, right? I'm trying to follow a particular timeline, and हम history को उठाते हुए चल रहे हैं, ठीक है? उसके बाद we would talk about how childhood is like today. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'd want everyone to have these handouts. All right, yeah. This is a summary of what we're doing today in points. Okay, now just keep this handout in front of you and keep on adding whatever you think you'd need on this particular paper.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if Supreme Industrial era की बात हो रही है, maybe children of the upper class might have been treated a bit different.
Of course, that's the entire idea that I'm trying to bring in. I mean, we're on the same line now. What you're saying is, even when you're talking about the pre-industrial era, I'm just repeating what you just said, even when we're referring to the pre-industrial era, there's a possibility that the children of the, let's just say aristocrats, the children of the elite, their experiences as compared to the experiences that a child from, let's just say, from a less privileged background would be different. मैं भी तो यही कह रहा हूँ. The idea that it is not natural, it is not universal. It's the society that defines how it is, and our experiences differ. All right, I repeat, I've handed over a handout to you that has a summary in points for whatever we're doing right now. I want everyone to add on content on this. ठीक है, जो basics हैं वो सारी इसके ऊपर लिखी हुई हैं. I would want everyone to put the pen to paper. No, I did not say that. I said write on this. Write on this paper. Yeah, write on this paper. Whatever you think you want to add up, write on this paper. Now, I have my reasons why I'm saying this, because this topic, you'd see this is pretty lengthy, right? This is pretty lengthy, but at the same time, I want you all to have something summarized in front of you, so that when you're preparing yourself for your examinations, you have things all put together, right? We talk about that later. Beta, the CI timetable and all, we'll talk about that later. Listen, I want you to focus over here. Okay, now of childhood was invented, and what we now think of as childhood would not have made sense to our ancestors. Clear here? Right? I mean, if I talk about, I mean, we're talking about ancestors over here. Now, considering this pandemic and this amount of amount of exposure kids have to technology today, you see kids watching Netflix. They have their own shows. There are kids who अलग प्रोफाइल होती है किड्स की नेटफ्लिक्स के ऊपर, या आज अगर आप कंपेयर करते हो तो बच्चे, I mean, there are kids who started their schooling through Zoom, through computer. I mean, I did not even, this never occurred to me. 2017-18 तक मेरे ज़हन में, मतलब 19 तक भी, जब तक आपके पास कोविड आ नहीं गया था, तब even I couldn't relate to it. So ancestors तक तो जाए तो that's a totally new world. Now getting back to this, Aries claimed that in pre-industrial societies, the type of childhood that existed, right? We're talking about a pre-industrial society. I want everyone to focus. Come on, look over here. According to Philip Aries, in pre-industrial society, the type of childhood that exists in modern societies today simply did not exist. I'm sure everyone, every single person in front of me would agree to this. Clear? He argued that as soon as children were no longer physically dependent on their parents, that is around the age of 7 years that I just said, they were treated no differently to adults. Childhood did not extend beyond this age. He argues that children in medieval societies were treated as miniature adults. ये सारी चीजें अभी मैंने बोली हैं. Awesome, sir. ये मंगाएंगे आप?
नहीं, वो सजा का मेरे पास आया था।
या मुझे बाहर मिले तो मैंने ऐसे बोल दिया कि भाई ये
उसको उठा
स्पीड से करो. सर
इसको फोन करके पूछेंगे या जाना पड़ेगा?
नहीं, आपको जाना पड़ेगा ये लेने के लिए. सर ये मॉडल मेरे ख्याल से देखिए ना, हमें लैंड चाहिए, ठीक है, हमें लैंड चाहिए. ये मेरे ख्याल से हमारे काम का है. एक ये काम का है, और ये जो है ये RJ45 की तो लैंड ही है ना, तो ये हमारे काम का, ये हमारे काम का. बाकी आप अपने एक्सपीरियंस को मद्देनजर रखते हुए. हाँ जी,
5,000 रुपये बोले थे, ये मैंने बोला था।
किसने बोला? उन्होंने. हाँ ठीक है, देख लें, देख लीजिएगा, चले वो, ठीक है सर. अगर गारंटी शारंटी, ओके, थैंक यू सर. Okay, now come on, have a look at this. Aries claims that in pre-industrial societies, the type of childhood that exists in modern societies today simply did not exist. He argued that as soon as children were no longer physically dependent on their parents, that is around the age of 7 years, they were treated no differently than to adults. Childhood did not extend beyond this age. He argues that children in medieval societies were treated as miniature adults. Now, I'm assuming everyone sitting over here has an idea about what the word medieval means, right? Middle-aged societies, after 2-3 saal pehle, who took part in the same work and play activities as grown-ups. They certainly did not enjoy. Now, look at this. They certainly did not enjoy the special and unique treatment in terms of protection, responsibilities, and rights that many more industrialized societies believe children are entitled today. आज बच्चों को एक sense of entitlement है. Yes, I do agree कि ये sense of entitlement कुछ बच्चों को ज्यादा है, कुछ बच्चों को कम है. Come on, you wonderful souls, I want you to put your pen to paper, right? This मैं भी यही कह रहा हूँ कि देखिए, ये सेंस ऑफ एंटाइटलमेंट हर बच्चे को नहीं है. ये सेंस ऑफ एंटाइटलमेंट, the protection that they have, the rights that they have, it varies from society to society, region to region. Clear here? Where of course the general understanding over here is that individuals or childhood experiences that kids have in the more developed parts of the world, it is way more than childhood experiences. I mean, the childhood experiences they have their childhood is considered to be more protected. Clear here? Do we all understand this? Now, Aries claims that the main reason for treating children in much the same way as adults was that the concept of age in medieval societies and its interpretation. देखिए, interpretation of childhood, interpretation of age. हम लोग कहते हैं ना, age is just a number, right? आज आप देखते हो, with the passage of time, if I link this back to what we've studied earlier, आपके पास beanpole families बढ़ती जा रही है in many developed parts of the world. This entire notion of you being old at 60 is changing today. Clear? हमारे पास life expectancy कम है. The way you're interpreting age, right? हमारे पास जनाब अगर कोई 40s में 50s में बंदा कोई लाल कपड़े पहनता है तो लोग कहते हैं बूढ़ी बूढ़ी लाल लगाम. Right? It's considered to be something that's not really appropriate for them in our part of the world. But then again, out in the West, in many developed parts of the world, the way they see childhood is very different from the way the way they interpret age. The way they interpret age is very different from the way age is interpreted in our part of the world. Clear? Now, moving on. In many pre-industrial societies, people did not generally know their date of birth. Right? Let's read this again. In many pre-industrial societies, people did not generally know their date of birth. यहाँ पे बात करें pre-industrial societies की, हमारे मुल्क में आज भी, this wonderful example that this gentleman has thrown, अक्सर लोगों की date of birth 1st January लिखा हुआ होता है, because उनको पता ही नहीं है, वो अंदाजा लगा रहे होते हैं. Clear here? आप 1st January की बात करें, अक्सर लोगों को ईयर भी नहीं पता होता. हाँ, चलें. People did not generally know the date of birth or the exact age. The registration of births that no break, bro, no break at all. हाँ, आप होके आ जाएं. Okay. Registration of births that is a legal obligation today simply did not exist. Clear here? Moving on. Aries argues that this uncertainty about age meant that people in medieval societies did not see individuals in terms of their chronological age. Chronological age क्या होती है? How old you are. That's your chronological age, right? If you're 17 years old, that's your chronological age. If you're 18 years old, that's your chronological age. Yeah, come. Why would you leave your watch here? Okay. So did not see individuals in terms of their chronological age, but rather in terms of their physical appearance. Clear here? Right? आज भी कहते हैं कि अक्सर वालिदैन अपने बच्चों को डांटते हुए या थोड़ी सी शर्म दिलाते हुए कहते हैं कि ना साइज देखो. I see you smiling there. तो या ढगे हो गए हो, डड्डे हो गए हो. You find it relatable, right? But rather in terms of the physical appearance, abilities, and habits. Consequently, if a 7-year-old had a distinct personality, if he or she could perform physical tasks and could converse with older people, then he or she was regarded as little different to adult peers, right? So it was your personality, it was your physical appearance, it was your abilities, it were the habits that you had developed that used to be used as parameters through which आपकी society के अंदर status या significance को gauge किया जाएगा. Clear here? अब it was therefore perfectly normal for such many adults to be working alongside their older peers in agriculture work, or for royals. Now look at this one, child. Or for royals, aristocrats, even 7-year-olds to be fully participating in formal ceremonies or to find themselves engaged to be married. One area which illustrates the lack of distinction between the world of children and adults in pre-industrial societies is crime and punishment. You all, I'm sure, are aware कि आपके पास almost हर जगह पे पूरी दुनिया के अंदर आपके पास एक एज स्पेसिफाइड होती है जिससे पहले आपको, even if you're involved into an act that is seen as a criminal act, you're not punished. Clear? But for example, between the 16th and 18th century in Britain, dozens of children aged between 17 and 17 years of age were hanged for crimes such as arson and housebreaking. Do we understand this? All right. Now, taking it ahead, but before I take, Haji, yeah, arson, when you're deliberately putting something on fire. आग लगाना, ठीक है? Okay. Now, before I proceed, have a look at this. Have a look at this slide that you guys have in front of you. You don't need to copy this. I'll be sending this file to you all once we're done. Have a look at all of these questions, especially the questions that have been highlighted over here. ये आपके पास questions हैं that you've had from May, June 2006 to May, June 2015. If you want questions between 2015 and 2021, वो भी मैं आपको दे दूंगा, but you have a look at these questions. I'm not asking you to attempt all of these questions. I'm not asking you to attempt. Just read through them thoroughly. I'm just give them a read right now. When you are back at home, read through them thoroughly. You can get questions like this as well. Topics तो आपके वही हैं, लेकिन questions आपके देखिए 2021 में आपका syllabus change हुआ है, 2021 के अंदर जहाँ पे आपका syllabus change हुआ है, आपका question, do you say something? हाँ? Yeah, I'm coming there, right? इसके अंदर आपके पास जो questions हैं, इन questions को phrase अलग तरीके से किया जाएगा, right? For instance, if I use this question that we have right at the top, this question says, this question that we had in May, June 2015, variant B, if you are to get a question today, right? I mean, in your examinations, wo is tarike se hoga, evaluate the claim that protection of children is the most significant function of the family. So it's just being rephrased. Clear? Okay. Now, another concern this young lady has over here is about there being a 16-mark question if I talk about this November 2013 variant. Okay, मोहतरमा आपका सिलेबस 2021 में, that is 2021 के अंदर चेंज हुआ है. उससे पहले आपका सिलेबस 2014 में चेंज हुआ था, 6 साल पहले, ठीक है? 2014 से पहले family, the unit family that you're studying right now, this used to be tested in A2. मतलब family A2 का टॉपिक होता था, और A2 के अंदर आपके पास 16 मार्क का evaluative question होता था. Clear? So the idea over here is to give you an the reason why I have all of this in front of us to give you an idea कि इस तरीके से आपको question phrase करके दिया जा सकता है. ठीक है, मैं आपको attempt करने का नहीं कह रहा, कर लें तो बहुत अच्छी बात है, right? Or you could do your brainstorming. Do we proceed? Right now, taking it ahead, moving on. Let's try. Okay, there are a couple of more questions I think I would want you all to have a look at as well. Explain 2 ways in which families have become child-centered in some societies. सामने कुछ marking schemes के points हैं, आप लोग देख के पढ़ सकते हो. Evaluate the view that social class is the main factor affecting the experience of childhood. Right? Again, these questions have been rephrased according to your 2021 paper structure. They have been rephrased according to your 2021 paper structure. Clear? अब उसी तरीके से we have another question that says, evaluate the view that the concept of childhood is very different today than in the past. Are we clear? Right? Then we have another question that says, evaluate the view childhood is a time when children are free from the pressures of adult life. Clear? So when I send this file to you, this is a digital version, like I keep on saying, आप इसका print out निकाल के इसको नहीं पढ़ सकते, लेकिन आप इसे अपने iPad, laptop या phone के ऊपर, whatever suits you, उसको आप zoom करके you can have a look at these points. This would help you. Clear here? Now, moving on, we just spoke about Philip Aries, right? We just spoke about Philip Aries. Let's have a look at how Philip Aries claimed what he claimed, right? So Aries' analysis of medieval paintings, like I said, I'd mentioned this earlier as well. Okay? Aries based his ideas about the medieval experience of childhood on an analysis of representations of children in medieval paintings, right? Medieval age ke andar aapke paas there were some representations of children through paintings, jisko dekh ke Aries being the historian came up with his entire notion of childhood being a recent development or recent invention. He claimed that there was no qualitative difference in the way Now, mind it, there was no qualitative difference in the way children and adults were portrayed in the art of the medieval period because children were seen as simply a reduced version of adults. I mean, imagining this entire thing sounds so funny. Children, and if you guys have come across any पुरानी पेंटिंग तो आप म्यूजियम वगैरह के अंदर जाते हैं आप बहुत है आपके पास बहावलपुर का आप जिक्र कर रहे थे नूर महल है आपके पास बहावलपुर में एक और भी है बहरहाल आप पुराने म्यूजियम्स वगैरह के अंदर जाते हो तो आर कंट्री वी हैव अ रिच कल्चर आप देखते हो पुराने अगर 100-200 साल पुराने जो हाँ या बच्चे बट आई एम ट्राइंग टू अवॉइड द वर्ड no the word I was trying to avoid was jagirdar but yeah because recently इसको negative connotation about but yeah अगर आप देखते हो ये like let's stick to Bahawalpur the example let's stick to Bahawalpur since you've recently visited Bahawalpur आपके पास आपको पता है कि independent state थी right तो उनका the state head उनके बच्चे वगैरह जो भी थे आप उनकी pictures वगैरह देखें they'd be dressed like a miniature version of their parents right so this I don't know if you guys do understand this link and this analogy but if you've ever seen or come across anything like this might sound pretty relatable now moving on like perfect that's such an amazing example Akbar was 13 when he took the throne perfect so as simply reduced versions of adults paintings showed that infants wearing baby clothes which were generally the same for boys and girls but artists portrayed those children aged over 7 years as wearing a smaller version of adult clothing styles and as having the same but miniaturized physiques as their adult peers. They were often portrayed with serious adult-like expressions on their faces. Okay, just visualize that. I see you smiling there. There were rarely any of the stylized features that were often associated with paintings, paintings of children today, such as vulnerability, innocence, dependency, chubbiness, large eyes, small hands, smiling faces. Summing this entire thing up, वो जो बच्चों को देख के आपका वो awe factor आता है ना, वो नहीं था इन pictures के अंदर कहीं पे भी. Clear here? Do we get this? So let me squeeze this in. We're talking about Aries का analysis. Aries के analysis से हमें पता चलता है that what Aries found out was children looked like these. I mean, they lacked this. The way these children were portrayed by painters lacked all of these features that you typically expect from children. Are we good? Maybe, yeah. To show that they were tough, to show that they could do what adults could do. Clear here? Moving on, we have had this question recently, May June 2021. The 2-1 variant minded Pakistan के अंदर हमारे पास क्योंकि पाकिस्तान zone 4 में fall in होता है हमारे पास 2-2 variant होता है ठीक है तो ये हमारे बच्चों को सवाल नहीं आया हुआ. Evaluate the view that in contemporary society the family has become child centered. Clear? Do you see this? Have a look at this question. Come on. Do you see this question? I'll hand over this to you. Don't worry. I'll hand over this to you. Right? I just want you to add up like this wonderful child is doing, add up content like this on that particular paper. अब इस question को देखें. Evaluate the view that in contemporary society, family has become child-centered. जी. अब ये देखें. इसी चीज में से आपका 8 mark का भी आ सकता है. Have a look at this. Come on, have a look at this. ठीक है. Moving on. Aries argues that the medieval concept of childhood first began to evolve. हम बात कर रहे हैं अब medieval concept जो childhood का था. Medieval concept of childhood, right? How is it that it started evolving into the modern version childhood towards the end of the 17th century? He notes that paintings of children during this period start to specifically show them as children rather than many adults, right? So we're talking about an analysis through paintings, and paintings found from the end of 17th century showed that children were portrayed as we see children today, and not as many adults, right? He suggests that the main reason for this was a steady decrease in the infant mortality rate. A steady decrease in the infant mortality rate. अगर आपके पास देसी और टिपिकल एग्जांपल दूं तो अगर कोई मतलब आई डोंट नो इफ दिस इज रिलेटेबल आपकी एज के लिए लेकिन यू नो व्हेन वी वर ग्रोइंग अप we knew अगर आपके पास मतलब if there was someone in their 70s 80s if you know someone you ask them तो अक्सर खवातीन they end up saying oh I gave birth to 8 kids 6 survived and they very conveniently say that right because आपके पास back then आपका infant mortality rate बहुत ज्यादा high था clear here so which meant that it became more likely that children would survive childhood consequently parents began treating them with more interest and affection clear here Aries argues that a distinct culture of childhood started to emerge from the 17th century. A culture of childhood, a distinctively different culture of childhood started emerging from the 17th century onwards in both America and Europe and took on the following features. Now, if you have a look at these features, number one, there was a certain style of clothing that was seen as exclusive for children, right? So distinctive features of childhood that were witnessed, right, in the US. Number two, there were games and toys that were invented. Games and toys were invented and manufactured specifically for children. Aries claimed that those childish games that had existed in the medieval period were played by both adults and children. Aries argued that the biggest influence on the emergence of modern childhood was there was a profound social change. अब जनाब सोसाइटी के अंदर आपके पास चेंज आया है और वो सोसाइटी का चेंज इवेंचुअली रिफ्लेक्ट हुआ है फैमिली लाइफ एक्सपीरियंसेस के अंदर और अगर फैमिली लाइफ एक्सपीरियंसेस के अंदर सोसाइटी का चेंज रिफ्लेक्ट हुआ है तो वो टुवर्ड्स द एंड आपके पास चाइल्डहुड एक्सपीरियंसेस पे भी तो आएगा रिफ्लेक्ट होगा क्लियर हियर Now, there was a profound social change in the 17th century. Social change, social change, social change. Don't miss on this one. Especially among the merchant class or bourgeois in terms of their everyday lifestyles. Up to the 17th century, Aries claims, up to the 17th century now, okay? Everyday social life and interaction with others was based on sociability. It was normal for citizens to spend most of the time in their communities with their friends and neighbors. I'm sure you'd all agree to this. This idea of everyone having their own personal space or privacy is again a recent invention. Back when we were growing up, things weren't as intense as they are today. Today, young kids, even in a country like ours, the South Asian country, हमारे बच्चे भी, you'd see they demand personal space. Clear here? We get to hear about stories like these from people around. If you don't have young kids at home, I'm sure at some point have heard about this. And I saw you smiling, so you found it funny when kids do that. But you know for a fact that kids do that. Many kids, I'm not saying everyone does that, but you'd come across many kids who do that. Right? Now, your age, you demand personal space, privacy. Back when we were growing up, there was no such thing like that. नहीं आप लोगों की बात कर रहा हूँ अच्छा नहीं है अच्छा बहुत अच्छी बात है नहीं है ओके जी हाँ पर्सनल टाइम का ब्रेक चाहिए आप जाना चाह रहे हैं आप चले जाएं आप जाएं अपना 2-4 मिनट का बस समझ में नहीं आएगा ना फिर बर्दाश्त करें आप बैठे थोड़ी देर इधर ओके look over here but during the course of the century everyday life based on privacy became more dominant clear here as a lifestyle. This meant that members of society chose to spend most of the time at home with their extended kin. Aries argued that this coincided with more attention being paid to children. Clark suggests that a middle class model or ideology of the family became popular in this era based on the idea that self-contained families led by a strong father organized around the proper upbringing of children. Clear here? अगर आप sociability ka idea ko agar aap further lete ho to men started spending more time at home when they were spending more time at home if parents are spending more time at home the amount of time they'd have with their children would increase which probably did lead to them showing more of affection towards the child. More of affection leads, I mean, you could link all of this to protection, right? A proper upbringing of children, Aries claimed that child rearing gradually became the central purpose of family life in industrial societies, although this was not fully achieved until the second half of the 19th century. Clear here? Do we all get this? Do we understand this? फैमिली लाइफ का एक इम्पॉर्टेंट मोटिव बच्चों की अच्छी तरीके से परवरिश और तरबियत करना। ये देखिए ऊपर भी इससे रिलेटेड क्वेश्चन था ना यहाँ पे। ठीक है, so yeah, Philip Aries again, the historian, the author of the book Centuries of Childhood, 1962, according to Philip Aries. Now, Philip Aries has put his account, I mean, we've discussed his account in quite detail since the last half an hour. If we take this ahead and we talk about the criticism that Philip Aries faced, Linda Pollock, according to Linda Pollock, okay, now अब ये देखिए मैं इसके बारे में अगर आपको और पढ़ना है तो this is what page number 205, you take this ahead somewhere over it's not here, probably it's on some other slide maybe. All right, chose not to put that, I'd add that up later. So Linda Pollock, मैं आपको ऐसे ही समझा देता हूँ. Linda Pollock criticizes Aries for using a limited and highly selective source of set of source. भाईजान बात सुने. Do you think, now question yourself, do you think ये paintings एक layman afford कर सकता था back then? Don't you think it would be a very selective group that would be able to afford these luxuries? Likewise, don't you think when you talk about a painting typically reflects the artist's interpretation of how children were like? Clear here? Do we understand this? Another thing, आप लोग graduation के लिए अगर graduation ceremony के लिए photo shoot कराने जाते हो तो you dress in a particular manner. Likewise, it's highly likely those children, they were made to yeah, those children, they were made to appear like that. They were made to pose probably in a serious, with a serious face, to leave a lasting impression, which they did, to Aries at least. Do we proceed? Now, Linda Pollock in 1983 criticizes Aries for using a limited and highly selective set of sources and evidence such as paintings. She argues that such sources were generally unrepresentative of medieval society. Paintings in the medieval period were mainly commissioned by wealthy elites whose approach to children and childhood may not have been typical of a wider society. Clear here? Especially the peasant class. Moreover, a piece of art may only reflect the artist's subjective experience or point of view or his or her desire to follow an artistic trend. Linda Pollock argues that sociologists need to examine qualitative data that focuses on actual child-parent relationship rather than images. These can be found in diaries, autobiographies, and other first-hand accounts from those historical periods. Do we understand this? This is what Linda Pollock suggests. Do we move on? Taking it ahead, Adrian Wilson in 1980 argues that Aries makes the mistake of being ethnocentric. I'm assuming everyone sitting over here knows what ethnocentrism is, when you're relying on one typical culture, right? This means that he views the past from the perspective and judgment of the present, right? Is Aries trying to apply modern standards that we attribute to childhood with the childhood experiences individuals had back in the past? Is it so? Question mark. So this means that he views the past from the perspective and judgment of the present. Consequently, Aries argues that medieval society has a limited awareness of childhood because they lack modern society's awareness of what childhood are like and how they should be treated. Clear? They were probably doing what they saw happening, and to the time, if you compare it with what the 21st century today, aaj aap dekho childhood experiences, and because like I was giving an example, there are so many kids who started schooling through Zoom or any other digital platform, right? Aries therefore seem to be guilty of applying modern standards to past society. However, it can be quite simple that these societies had different standards of childhood. They may have loved their children in ways which people in modern societies might not understand. Clear? तो कहते हैं हम लोग अक्सर हमारी सोसाइटी में कहते हैं माँ की जिस बच्चे ने चप्पल नहीं खाई, हैंगर नहीं खाया, वो तो माँ का प्यार होता है. I don't see you agreeing to that. नहीं? 100% agree करते हैं आप? माँ का प्यार होता है, माँ की चप्पल. ओके नहीं, मैं नहीं कह रहा खुदा खास्ता आपने खाया. 2000 के बाद वाले बच्चों ने इतना नहीं खाया, पहले होता था. ठीक है. Okay, look over here. Despite these criticisms, look at this. Now we trying to gauge, right? We trying to evaluate, we trying to gauge, right? We trying to evaluate, we trying to gauge. जनाब हमने फिलिप एरीज की बारे में पढ़ लिया. हम फिलिप एरीज को थोड़ा गॉज करके देखते हैं कि फिलिप एरीज evaluate लिखा है मैंने, evaluation लिखते हैं कुछ भी. ठीक है. Philip Aries, we try to figure out what Philip Aries or how Philip Aries, the work he did, उसके अंदर ठीक है, उसके अंदर कुछ खामियां हैं लेकिन कुछ काम की चीजें भी होंगी. तो despite these criticisms, Aries' work has been very influential. Most historians agree that modern society has experienced a massive change in sentiments about children. It is generally accepted that childhood was experienced and imagined quite differently in the medieval period. The way that parents treat children today would be unrecognizable to those from previous centuries. Of course, here this would be unrecognizable. I totally agree with this. Here, Aries clearly showed that childhood is not just a natural category which is experienced in the same way at all times and in all societies. Rather, it is an ever-shifting social concept of or invention. Clear here? इसको हम एरीज साहब का conclusion कह सकते हैं. Does anyone have any question? Any question, anyone? All right. A 2-minute break only. Do you want to avail this offer? Do you want a 2-minute break? Yes or no? 4.5 minutes. Okay, done. I want to see you all in 4 minutes. Bye. I mean, come on, quick.
Recording in progress.
All right, let's continue with where we had stopped. We are starting off with childhood and industrialization. Now, when we talk about childhood and industrialization, now, of course, we would not be able to complete this entire topic, this unit today. We'd keep it for the next lesson, but let's try covering whatever we can cover up. All right. Now, moving on, we're talking about childhood and industrialization. The question that rises over here is, did industrialization bring in a change when it came to the experiences of being a child? If it did, to what extent? Number one. Number two, did it change for everyone equally, or were there differences? Now, if we talk about individuals from a working class background, rather say children from a working class background, right? If we say children from a working class background, it was seen that children from the working class background, they were still found to be doing, it was seen that they were found to be economically or financially helping out their parents, right? Financially helping out their parents, right? Industrialization के बाद की हम बात करते हैं, ठीक है? Industrialization से पहले अगर यही बच्चे आपको agrarian societies में and agriculture या cottage industry के अंदर parents को help करते हुए नजर आ रहे थे, तो क्या industrialization के बाद experiences for them changed? No, it was seen that these kids were actually working for their families, working to add up to the money that the family generated, right? Industrialization ke baad bhi work children from the working class, they used to work as in factories, in mines. चिमनीज बच्चे साफ करते थे. अब चिमनीज के अंदर जाहिर सी बात है कि बड़ा तो नहीं जा सकता चिमनी को साफ करने के लिए, ठीक है? They used to be involved into activities that were considered to be dangerous for them in the longer run. छोटे बच्चे अगर फैक्ट्रीज में काम करते हैं तो the toxic material generated from there, that is going to cause them harm. Get it? In the, oh yes, even today as we speak. Right, now moving on in childhood and industrialization. However, it is very important to understand that the changes in childhood that Aries documented took some time to filter down to ordinary families from the bourgeois experience. Aries acknowledged that industrialization did not lead to a radical change. He acknowledges that industrialization did not lead to a radical change. It did not lead to a radical change. I'm assuming we all get this. In the way working class children were treated, an examination of European societies in the industrial 18th and 19th century suggests that, अच्छा हम European societies की बात कर रहे हैं, अभी भी हम हमारे जैसे countries, South Asian countries की बात नहीं कर रहे. In the industrial 18th and 19th century suggests that the concept of childhood as it is known today was still evolving. Clear here? Yes, this is a very ethnocentric view. पीछे थे हम लोग, yeah, ठीक है? Many children's lives were actually characterized by poverty, hard labor, and exploitation. During the early industrial period, working class children in European societies such as Britain were frequently found working in factories, mines, and mills. This had an adverse effect on their health as children were often killed or injured at work and were exposed to toxic substances which shortened their lives. However, despite these risks, children's labor was often regarded as an economic necessity, especially for the working class families, right? Now, children back then were considered to be economic assets, unlike children today who are seen as an economic liability. So yeah, economic necessity by parents in order to stave off poverty and the threat of the workhouse. Children were also viewed as economic assets by their parents because their wage in the absence of a welfare state. Now, you need to take into account all of these factors. Back then, you did not have a welfare state. If you did not have a welfare state, like we don't in Pakistan, I mean, कोई proper welfare system नहीं है, तो आज भी हमारे मुल्क में आपको you see a lot of beggary, right? आपको कई बच्चे भीख मांगते हुए नजर आ रहे होते हैं रोडों पे, right? You see kids involved into things that they should not be involved into. Clear here? Children were also viewed as economic assets by their parents because their wage in the absence of a welfare state could help support parents when they were too old or sick to work for themselves. Guess what? The 21st century, even today in many parts of Pakistan, you see this sort of attitude that people or families carry. क्योंकि हमारे पास यहाँ पे एक welfare system नहीं है, right? Now, this is another question that we had in October-November 2021, the 2-1 version. Gender is the most important factor affecting the experiences of children in the family. So you need to explain this view, and of course, this is your next question. They ask you to write down an argument against it. Very good. Moving on, social attitudes towards, can you switch off the slide here? Can you switch off the slide? This reflection on this iPad. Yeah, thank you. Social attitudes towards children started to radically change in the middle of the 19th century. In Britain, for example, government legislation known as Factory Acts was passed that excluded children from working in mines. Up, let me shrink the screen, focus on what's highlighted in pink. Children were excluded from working in mines. There were different measures taken by the British Parliament to get children off the streets, right? Compulsory mass education was introduced in the 1880s. Clear here? Yes. Children excluded from working in mines and in certain types of mill and factory work. This legislation also reduced the number of hours they could do paid work. Do you see the state intervention here? आपकी state intervene करना शुरू कर रही है, ठीक है? Many 19th century campaigners in Britain were concerned about the number of children who had become pickpockets, beggars, and even prostitutes, and consequently, legislation was passed by the British Parliament to get them off the streets and away from predatory adults. In the late 19th century, organizations such as Dr. Barnardo's were formed in societies such as Britain and the USA in order to protect vulnerable and especially abundant children from adult exploitation and cruelty. These organizations petitioned their respective governments to legislate in favor of children and childhood. Do we all understand this? Moving on, European countries such as Germany and the UK and the USA introduced compulsory mass education for children aged between 5 to 12 years between 1870 and 1920. However, some working class parents resisted state attempts to compulsory educate their children because their family wage and standard of living were very dependent on sending their children out to work. We see that happening in Pakistan even today. Ji.
Don't you think child laboring is better than child
I mean, आपका question है, don't I think child labor is better than child begging? You don't you think, I mean, the state should intervene and हमारा state ऐसा है तो हमारे state को कुछ करना चाहिए ना on sending the children out to work. Nevertheless, as Clark notes, by the end of the 19th century, while the lives of most children were still dominated by poverty, ignorance, and illness, the idea of child-centeredness as a key focus for policy development had firmly taken root in both the USA and most European societies. अब एक नजर child-centeredness क्या होता है इसको अच्छी तरह पढ़ लें because you've had a question on child-centeredness. Clear? Moving on. Let's have a look at some evidence that supports Aries again. Most sociologists now accept the validity of Aries' argument that the separation of the status of identity, separation of the status and identity of childhood from other life stages, right? Recognizing childhood as a distinctively different phase of an individual's life, an innocent phase of an individual's life. Clear? From other life stages is a modern social construction. Colin Haywood in 2001, for example, argues that what people expect of children today is very different compared with medieval times. Get this, beta? Colin Haywood, 2001. Dr. Tony Chapman in 2004 argues that it was not until the 19th century that childhood became socially constructed as a significant life transition that required in middle-class families at least particular forms of nurturing, supervision, discipline, and even distinctive clothing, play, and dedicated space in homes. Again, we're talking about the middle-class families over here. Clear here? Instead of children bringing economic advantage to households through gainful employment, they now represented a very significant cost to parents, right? Like I had said, children being seen as an economic liability today, children being seen as an economic liability today, as compared to them being seen as an economic asset. Do we understand this? And you know, with the passage of time, your childhood has been it has been lengthening too. आपका childhood का duration आपका बढ़ता जा रहा है childhood का. Would you agree to this? Right? आपके पास the more there are more and more there's more and more of time that is required, that is expected. There's more and more time that is required, that is expected for children to spend getting educated, right? The more time you spend getting educated, the more chances there are that you'd stay economically dependent on your parents. Again, the economic liability part, right? मैं personal attacks नहीं कर रहा, मैं समझा रहा हूँ जो किताब में लिखा हुआ है. So they now represented a very significant cost to parents and for longer periods of time, and this could be attributed to education, right? Chambers in 2012 too argues that the idea of a protected or sheltered childhood became very popular in the late 19th century, and this was reflected in social policy which sought to regulate child labor and to establish compulsory schooling. But then again, this has more to do. This again has more to do with the more developed parts of the world, right? The Western world. Clear here? So we were discussing the next topic that we have is child-centered child-centered in the 20th century. We have 1% battery left, and I'd like to end this up before this closes. So today we discussed this, we discussed this, we discussed this we do in the next lesson. Take good care of yourselves, stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected, stay humble, spread positivity, spread smiles, and Allah Hafiz.